Hey everybody, this is the basics of digital painting. I'm Pete Moorbacher. Every week we come out here and we spend some time doing some homework, doing some studies, talking about them. Normally I start things off with announcing the next week's homework topic, but as I was saying before we went live here, the holidays are upon us. Everybody's crunching. We got like just a little bit more than we got 2 weeks to Christmas. I think what's going to happen is we're going to take a holiday break after tonight. Like this is going to be the last one for 2025 or 2024. We'll be back in 2025. I wanted to take a beat to like reassess and make sure that I was like making good assignments and like getting the promotion out for all this stuff. So it'll give me an opportunity to think about any kind of like adjustments or changes I want to make to the class. But definitely coming back in January. But I think we're going to take a couple weeks break. And, feel free to like mostly what I'm doing is pulling images from like the reference board that we have here on the Discord. There's a study reference board. I pull stuff from there. Delia and Dustin always pull in a ton of really great images. And it's been an awesome resource for me to be able to pull images for stuff like this. So feel free to go ahead and like do studies over the course of the next couple of weeks and post them in the homework channel and check out what each other are doing. But I'm not going to be running class for a couple of weeks. And I think what's going to happen is I am going to like make an announcement or something about homework in January, the week leading up to the next class. So everybody enjoy a little bit of time off, even if you're not celebrating anything in particular. Or maybe you hate the holidays. I think this is a great opportunity to take stock and reset just for the new year. I know I'm doing a lot of that. I've been really excited about all the stuff that we're planning for Huckleberry and all the things that I'm trying to wrap up and jump in on in January. Like it can't come soon enough for me. I'm really looking forward to wrapping up this year and like getting started on the next one. I hope you guys are too. So first things first, we are looking over Dr. Sensible, Gabe's stuff. Does not have a time lapse for us to watch this time, but it's all good. Hey Gabe, how's it going?
I know I failed you.
Yeah, you said you're gonna have to make the switch to Clip Studio soon.
Yeah, it's like I like having the time lapse thing, but it is an extra hour of work.
Oh, yep.
Bring it into DaVinci, set it up, time lapse it, export it, do all that good stuff. Where if I can just have that built in, then
it's kind of built in. I'm doing these item illustrations that I'm trying to finish before the holidays. And I am trying to run the time lapse feature. And I know at the very least you need to click a button to tell it to start at the beginning. And I keep forgetting. So I keep missing the beginning of like my work process on these. And I don't know what kind of weird hiccups or, failures this system is capable of. So we're going to find out together, like, where's Clip Studio Paint not good at doing the playback stuff. Another reason to switch to CSP. I think Photoshop's actually the only program that doesn't have playback, because Procreate has it, CSP has it, Krita has it built in. I don't know why Photoshop doesn't have it. They're supposed to be like the king. I don't know if Affinity has it. I haven't checked.
And all the other reasons to maybe stop using Adobe stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot. I've been sort of split on it because you get like in a certain amount of habits, you get familiar with stuff. It's nice and smooth to use the same tools over and over again. But taking some time to relearn and refocus is to like, invest in your future self is a good idea. It's something I'm always a little slow on, but so I'm trying to talk about it in public to encourage other people to do the same. So how did the study go for you this week? How do you feel about it?
I mean, I wanted so much more from it. I'm a big Frazetta and like 80s fantasy art fan, and this was pure 80s fantasy stuff. But I just only had a couple hours, so I tried to just give her. And so I'm not too happy with how it turned out, but I think like, just getting back into the study process was fun in and of itself.
Okay. What would you want more of if you had been able to spend more time with it?
I would have liked to just get more detail in, play more with color, to have, done some of the things like, her, what's it called, like clean up her leg a little bit. I think that there's just a lot of little moments in there that I would have liked to have done a little bit cleaner.
I think it's easy to get lost in the little moments when it comes to self-criticism. I think that we're wired to notice those things and then fixate on them more so than the way other people read our work. And so I try to get suspicious of them, and I always try to encourage people I'm working with to like be more forgiving of that stuff, because I think that when it comes down to it, the broad strokes are ultimately what gets us. And so I want to look at some broad strokes here with you. Number one, color. You did some experiment with color, which I think is admirable, but there is an attribute to it which I think you lost from the original one. In the original one, we've got, aside from the hue, let's not think about the hue. Aside from the hue, there is some really interesting stuff going on with the color. Like, inside the all the lit areas, we have way lower saturation than in the shadow areas, which is an interesting inversion, because you usually think of shadows as being, desaturated, like mixing through black or having a darker hue of your main color. But in this case, it's actually inverted. The brightness of the skin tone is so bright that we actually are losing the saturation of it. And so the bright areas are actually desaturated. And then the shadowed areas, they've got this really bright fill light on it, and it's going saturated. So I think that if you wanted to keep some of the essential qualities from the reference while doing different hues, I would aim to try to maintain that balance between like desaturated highlights and saturated shadows, and maybe even push to exaggerate that. Another aspect of the color beyond the hue is this variation in color temperature. We have these warm colors coming in off the lights, and then extremely cool colors coming in off the shadows. You don't necessarily need to maintain that like it's going to be cool in the shadows and warm in the highlights. You can invert that just as well. So if you wanted to have like red and orange be your primary colors in the shadows here, one of the things that you could do to achieve that result is use really cool colors in the highlights. So you could be picking really cool complementary colors to wash in here. And I think that if you were to look at the reference and ask yourself, where does it feel like I'm getting warmer tones, you'd choose to put, cooler colors in there, and then vice versa. And you can flip that inside out and it'll work for you just fine, because it's really more about the relationship between the warms and cools than it is about, which parts are warm, which parts are cool. And you can see as I'm starting to, add in this very bright, cyan color here, we're starting to get a little bit more of that sense of that overlit bright light.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's coming back into it right away without even a lot of fuss. And so it's that contrast across these different aspects of the color that are part of what makes this image what it is. And so looking out for those kinds of contrast is really big. The other contrast I'm seeing in here is in the shadow area, we have this really cool interplay between the purples and blues.
Yeah.
And again, I think that if we think about these as being more or less equal in value, but one shifted a little warmer, one shifted a little cooler, I would be interested to see what is your sort of, red inverted version of that. Like, maybe we have, if you've got one side of it that's a little bit more yellow and one side that's a little bit more purple, and you pick okay, well, those parts along the side of the face up here are going to be a little bit more yellowish. They're going to be, still very saturated, still very dark. Maybe we go darker than that even. Oops, I want a normal layer. There we go. And then we look at the purple areas and we go, okay, well, we're going to go on the other side of the spectrum here. And so we're going to do some of these purples. And so we're just going to split the difference between your hues here and get like variations of them, one a little warmer, one a little cooler, to mimic the same separations that we're seeing here. So I love doing this where, you just pick a different color paradigm, but you do the same kinds of variations that you see in the reference. And it forces you to do one little extra step in your head. But I find that the math is kind of easy to do. And once you start on it, you realize that like looking at like this magenta versus this yellow as being equivalent to like the blue and the purple, it's like not actually that hard to use the reference to make the like a different version. And so it can be a lot of fun to do, and it's great. It's a great exercise to add your own spin onto these sorts of things.
Yeah, it's funny because like I definitely had more of that blown out thing when it was more when I was closer to grayscale. But I was looking at a bunch of Frank reference where he has so much sienna and like reds and yellows in there. So I guess I definitely pulled it a little too monochromatic at the end for what you're saying in terms of the part of the visual interest of the original image.
Yeah, and like a lot of Frazetta work, he does include a ton of different tubes of paint throughout his paintings. Like some of them, they do end up with this very orange and brown look. It's got a lot of value variation, but it's like less like varied in the colors. But he's just like not afraid to throw in a bunch of insane colors into spots because it's like creating interest or it's bringing the eye over to a spot, and it just almost doesn't need to be justified by the lighting or the local colors. It's just that like it's aesthetically pleasing, and so he just goes for it. And in a piece where you've got like a lot of little color accents, like because of the way that the light is breaking apart inside the glass here, I think it's fair to just sort of grab any color on the rainbow and throw it wherever it feels like it adds some amount of value for you. And I think it's fair. I think it's fair for you to do it. And, I mean, you're certainly allowed to do it. It's art, but I think it would be a fun and interesting thing to try to pull off. And I think it would still match what the goals were.
Yeah, I have a lot to get better at with picking colors. That's a huge thing.
The main thing I want to express today is that color is not like we think of color as like like just the color wheel, like figuring out like what hue is this supposed to be and like how light or dark is it supposed to be. But there's actually a lot of different dimensions to color that you can create a spectrum with. And as long as you are identifying some variation, some spectrum, and then you're mapping, like something onto it, you go, okay, well, I'm just going to focus on the saturation, but then you just don't get any of the hues right. Well, the thing might actually look pretty good. It'll have all this weird hue variation in it, but it'll look consistent because you're matching the consistency of the saturation. Or you can do the same quite a bit with color temperature. As long as you get the color temperature right on stuff, you can get the hues totally wrong. You can have a total rainbow smattering of hues as long as the temperatures are all relatively correct, and it'll look perfectly fine. It makes total sense to the eye. There's a lot of flexibility in color, and places where you can allow like huge amounts of variation in without making things read poorly. And like a lot of ways where you can invert or remap things, and it's just like an open playground to be able to play around with it because our eye just isn't as picky about it as it is about value. And so it allows us to have a lot of freedom when it comes to these kinds of experiments.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bit of a hierarchy. I think what I've heard is it's like value is at the very top, and then you have below it is the temperature, then the saturation, and then the hue is the least important part in order to like get something to read correctly.
Yeah, and I think definitely again I lost some of those values because it was pretty decent when I was only in grayscale, but then I did some gradient stuff, did some decent. Color stuff.
Just because I have a lot to say about it doesn't mean you didn't do a good job.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But yeah, the what's it called? I did an overpaint, of course, so that I could start playing with those colors. And I think I just overdid the blending on them a bit and lost some of those hard, cleaner delineations and value.
Okay. Well, great work as always. I got to move on because we got time against us here. But great to see your stuff.
Pete.
Thanks, Gabe. All right, next up I've got Kazim. Is Kazim here? Call me Kazim. Kazim's not here. All right. Kazim says, this was fun. I enjoyed drawing figures, and the reference was very appealing to study and break down. It looked like something out of an MTG card. I went for a poster look from the 80s. As usual, I started with grayscale base and then applied color. With that said, I struggle a lot with applying colors to a grayscale base, even though the gradients carried me through many choices. Lovely work, everyone. Yeah, everyone did do a great job this week. So I think that number one, like I like working grayscale into color because I feel like it creates a lot of opportunities for me. I feel like my brain is too small, too weak to be able to process values and colors simultaneously. And so I need to kind of build them first one and then the other. And then once I've kind of got both feet up on the platform, then I can kind of shimmy around and figure out like, maybe this needs to be a little brighter while also being a little bit more saturated, whatever. Like, I feel like once I've kind of got them both applied separately, then I can start to like make adjustments. And if you have an easier time going straight into color, by all means, go for it. You would be in good company. Plenty of top artists go straight into color. Many top artists split the process the way I do. I would say it's a preference thing, but I don't know if it is preference. I think it's a matter of like we're all wired a little differently, and so it's important for us to try multiple different ways of working when it comes to our work methods for applying color, the kinds of brushes we like to use, the order that we like apply all these steps in, and figure out what feels like good and natural for us personally, because that's like the main point of all of this. I think that there's no real like best way of working. And while I know you guys are coming to me for advice, I feel like it's important for me to constantly reiterate that like the way that I prefer to do things is just a matter of my own personal preference. And while I think that there's some broader truisms, I think you're all best served by experimenting with your process throughout this. And I'm trying to make sure that the criticisms that I level are fair across a lot of different work methods, and I'm not just evangelizing a particular way of attacking this. All right. With that said, I do also like that you have your own inventive color palette for this. I have some of the same notes that I gave Gabe. I was looking at this and I was thinking, more so than some of the other ones, I feel like her skin has turned green. Like the color of the lighting has turned into the color of her skin. And I was trying to figure out why, and then I realized why. And so I'm hoping that this will be an instructive lesson for everybody about what makes something look different between like the lighting color and the local color. I think the reason she looks green is because the green light that you've created here is not shining on any of the yellow dress. In the reference, we have a very light-skinned woman with a white dress, and so it's a blank page to apply the color of the lighting, and so we see a lot of the lighting color throughout it. But I think that in this really extreme lighting environment, you're not going to see a lot of local colors, period. So if she were to have let me try to do this in reverse a little bit, actually. If I were to try to make her dress look more gold on this photo, I could maybe add a little bit of hard light. I'm going to try to get maybe it needs to be a lighter version here. Trying to find the right hue to add to this to make it feel like it's gold. Yeah. Like the parts that are sort of more softly lit, we can maybe get a little bit of yellow in there to bring in the gold.
Hey Santa,
What's that?
I think there's a mail thing that needs to be signed.
Bob's not here?
Yeah.
I'm on broadcast. There's a guy trying to deliver a package. Let me just take care of this. I think I'm the only adult in the house right now. Okay, that's a new one for the class. Sorry about the delay. All right. So what I was saying here is that trying to get the dress to look yellow, I'm only looking to apply the color of the gold, the yellow, to the areas where we can see just the right amount of white light on it. Because if we start to apply this yellow color through the shadows here, you can see it's like maybe it's going to tint the blue a little bit, but we're not going to get like dark yellows through the shadows. One of the main things that I saw people struggling with this week was that there is an instinct to try to make the shadows of an object be just a darker version of the lit part. So like if we have, my words are spontaneously escaping me, but we'll get there. So like, let's say we have a yellow orb here. Oh my God, I've got it on the wrong layer. Our highlight, the instinct is that the highlight is going to be yellow. It's going to be, of course, it's going to be yellow. It's going to be like a brighter version of the yellow, right? And that the shadow is just going to be a darker version. And we do this over and over and over again because it just seems sensible, but it's just wrong. It's just fully wrong. This is like not the way to do it at all. Like what we have here is we're seeing the local color where light is hitting it, and where shadow's hitting it, where's their shadow, we're not going to see anything theoretically. Like if there's no light on it, it would be black. But what we see is bounce light. And so in this environment where we have the shadows being filled in with the blue light, we would just see, even if the ball is yellow, we would be seeing blue through the shadows. Because that's the color of the light that's filling in that shadow region. And that's what we see here on this model, is that the light coming in from one direction is white and the other is coming in is blue. And so we have white highlights, and then in the shadows we have blue shadows. And so if you wanted to reproduce the same effect on this figure here, This has been a long trek to get to this point, but you would have to use the exact same color of light that you have in the shadows here to fill in all of the shadows on this dress. And so they would be green. They would be the same color green as, I mean, maybe even you wouldn't get much of that yellow through at all. And then you could get the sense of green light with light skin as opposed to having her have that kind of Star Trek look, Star Trek alien. You can tell both teams really wanted to win. Yeah, that's true. All right, so that's my big lesson there is we need to think about the shadows as being not just a darker version of the main color, but its own distinct entity. It's got its own palette. The highlights have their palette because they are there's the color of the light mixing with the color of whatever object it's hitting. And then in the shadows, we have a completely different arrangement where there might be different lights with their own different color properties hitting these things. And they're going to be like, they just need to be treated as two separate entities. And while they kind of transition progressively one into the other, like we see looking at the knee here, we have a very good example of the ways in which the colors transition from the lit areas where we see the warmth of the skin tone, and then it bleeds over the softer shapes. It bleeds slowly down into the blue, while harder cuts, we jump straight from the warmer tones into these really cold ones. And it's like we need to assess them as like two separate, unique like groups of color. And while like a lot of lighting conditions that don't really show that, in this case, in really extreme lighting conditions with lots of like bright colored gels, we get it. The knee was a nightmare to paint. To me, this is the sort of thing I have the easiest time with. This is like these kinds of like goopy, big organic shapes like this. This is the thing that like I feel like I have the easiest time with every single time. So it's really, if it's hard for you, sorry to hear that. But I think personally, I think for me, this is the easy stuff. It's like there's so many things that are hard to paint in the world, but these kinds of patterns, to me, it just makes sense. But so thank you, Kazim, for contributing your work this week. Next up, we got Nanoboy. Nanoboy's here. Hey, how's it going?
Hello. Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Tell me a little bit about your work this week.
Yeah, I think this was like one of the first prompts where I really decided I was going to go kind of beyond what the initial reference looked like.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really wanted to practice not being so literal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really enjoyed it. I also found in my Photoshop settings, I've been having a lot of trouble with like the value balance not being totally on point. And I looked at the proof setup, and it was not set to monitor RGB. So what was happening is like the difference between all 0 and like 111 on the RGB was so crazy different that there was like no subtlety in how dark I could get.
Huh.
So I switched it, and it seems to have helped. It's not perfect yet, but it's much better than it was before. So I think I was able to get a little bit better subtlety with the values, although I know there's, looking at it, I can see there's something not quite to what I would have liked.
What would you? What would you like to be different?
I don't know that I can quite like put my finger on it. There's just something about and maybe it might just be different on like dependent on what monitor I'm looking at or the final like saved JPEG. There's just always something a little bit like sometimes my values end up being all too dark. There's just something about the balance that I tend to struggle with. And I also am I guess guilty of what you were just saying with the shadow colors. So I think I did it fine on the skin, but the clothes, because I was going wildly outside the reference, I didn't quite add in like the right kind of coolness to the shadows on the clothing.
Yeah, yours is another good example of what I was just talking about, where I mean, we could see it really clearly. Like you have this color here on the leotard, the purple, and as we in the highlight area, we've got this, and then as we go into the shadows, you can see that the bar here on the hue is like not moving as we go through here.
Yep.
And that's a sign that something's gone wrong. When you're working in traditional media, I learned how to paint first digitally. And so this is the first instinct of every digital painter. And what I learned was from traditional painters, where they say, "Oh, you never mix black." And I was like, "I'm not mixing black. I'm not adding black." And they're like, "No, but you are. What this is you're simply adding black to your colors, and it creates this look that feels like kind of too dark, kind of muddy, and it doesn't make any sense because you try to lighten it up and then there's no contrast. What are we missing here?" And the thing that we're missing is that there needs to be like I was talking about with Gabe, there's different types of contrast. And simply moving from like lighter to darker versions of the same hue tend to look wrong, because that's not how colors behave in reality. What tends to happen is that we see a shift in hues as we move from like areas that are being warmed by the light versus being hit by secondary light. And in this case, it's being exaggerated even more because we have this really, really like bright blue fill light, and we're getting it across the face here. But then because we're not getting that same shift in the shadows, it's difficult to differentiate what's being hit by a light and what's, in shadow. When you break things down, you can usually start to see you can usually break things down into kind of like these two zones, like the lit area and the shadowed area. And while there's oftentimes a certain amount of blending between the two, it tends to be kind of useful to examine the piece from the perspective of like, well, where's the cutoff line? What's in shadow, versus what's in highlight, and then treating those segments very separately. And this is a good reference for seeing that, because the delineation between the two is so exaggerated. Like it's got these really, really hard lines where the light cuts off. And then we also have these really big shifts in saturation, in hue, like in every aspect between the lit areas and the shadowed areas. And it gives us this blueprint for being able to do the same thing in our own work. So when it comes to your piece here, what I think that would help give you the feeling that you're looking for is to pick where you are, where the light is hitting, where it's not, being picky about that, to think about that as being the main choice of the lighting more so than the rendering. Figure out what it would look like if you were only having it be black and white. Where would you be putting the black? Where would you be putting the white? And then once we have that established, figuring out different colors for what goes in the light versus what goes in the shadow. And you have so much freedom in here. Once you realize the amount of freedom you have in terms of treating your shadows differently, you're going to love it. It's a great experience because it adds this extra layer of depth that instead of it being an extra challenge of like, oh no, I need to have another variable to balance. It's not really a variable you need to balance. It's actually this like big open door towards more freedom with using your colors, because you're not locked into using a single hue anymore. There's a whole variety of hues that are the correct ones to put inside your shadows. So the thing I want to impart more than anything for you is to just find where you're going to put those shadows and then be playful with it. Start to include things that you think might be totally wrong. Pick whatever accent colors you want to put in there and just treat the direction of the lighting, the way in which it's shaded, just totally separate from the lighting. And you'll find that there's this like huge amount of freedom available to you with color and with value that like before it seemed like, you know, you were trying to balance like these nuances of light and dark when really it's like it's like it's not nuanced at all. It's this big open playful space that you have to be able to put whatever you want in it. Shadows are some of my favorite things to paint because it allows me to stylize and treat the painting as like, you know, it in a very different way than the parts that are being touched by the light. And we got Frazetta being brought up before. I'm going to bring his stuff up a little bit, and just to give a demonstration of this. Oftentimes in Frazetta paintings, he does like a ton of. Let me see if I can find a really exaggerated example here. I know Vallejo also does this as well. But we see inside the shadowed areas oftentimes a whole chromatic spray of color and like interesting stuff going on. Sometimes he does like these really rich blacks, you know, built off of his ink work. I wonder if Vallejo would be actually. Boris Vallejo. And there's these paintings I have in my head, and I'm just like trying to remember where to find them. But like filling in the shadowed areas with a variety. Like look at what's going on in here. Like we have this big separation between the light and the shadow, and they create these really distinct shapes. And I think the reproduction here digitally actually downplays the amount of saturation and variation that's inside of there. It's almost like a field of like a nebula. There's like these clouds of color that are colliding into each other, and they're all happening inside of these shadow fields. You can go crazy inside those spaces and fill them up with all kinds of stuff that you think is going to be fun. Like look inside here, all this area that's being lost in shadow is just full of this high chroma stuff. There's oranges and reds and grays and everything all mixed in there. And it's almost its own composition apart from the stuff that's being lit. And I personally love to just like play in that space. It's like a big wide open playground that's hidden behind all of your highlights.
Yeah, that's something I've always really admired about like traditional painting too, because you, as you said, they never have just black shadows. There's always some hue that make it kind of really fit together with the whole composition. Mm-hmm. So
but for the hue to be measured as being separate from the highlights, it has to be different. So it's not just a matter of creating a separation in the values. Like to create a hue shift gives you contrast along this different axis. You know, once you introduce color as a new dimension to your work, beyond just the values, you now also have a different way of adding contrast beyond just the values. And so you can create light and shadow where the shadows are actually just as bright as the highlights. It's just that you contrast it across these different criteria, and you can totally make it work. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely look forward to trying to be a little bit more free with that.
Great. Well, I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you.
Any questions for me before I let you go?
I think I'm good for now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Next up, we've got Fawn. Fawn's here. Fawn's got a whole paragraph. But Fawn, do you have a mic? I'm not sure. I think we talked last week and you didn't have a mic. Fawn says, all right, I did it. It's a bit rushed, but I was learning new brushes, Pete's brushes. Yes, my size flow brushes. I'm sure some of you have tried them out. And a new program, CSP. So go easy on me. But it was really fun. I also do really like the brush pack. I was actually struggling a bit trying to find a brush that I liked, and already had downloaded the pack before I saw the video response from last week. But yeah, tried to focus on working big to small and a bit more messy this time. It was pressure as I went along, but I was able to experiment more, which was nice. Oh, Fawn's here and able to speak.
Hey,
Fawn.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming through great.
Great, awesome.
So tell me a little bit about it. I was just reading out your paragraph here, but I'm going to hear it in your own words.
Yeah, it was a little bit difficult just because I was learning a new program and new brushes at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun experimenting with them. I do really like the flow that your brushes provide. It was just really fun playing with this and packing in all that color. I really like the reference itself, and I was hoping to do a little bit more with it, but I only literally had yesterday. So
all right. Well, these studies are meant to be fast, so don't worry about not spending more time on it. I noticed in some areas, what I'm seeing from you is like I want to talk a little bit about blending, because the way that my brushes work, they've got a very particular like feature that like allows them to blend stuff in a way I like, but might not be natural for everybody. So I feel like some of the stuff I'm seeing
definitely.
here, I can see from the direction of your brush strokes that you may be running a little counter to the way that the brushes are intended to be used, and it's causing you a little trouble.
It took me quite a while to get the hang of any kind of process with them because I tend to overblend and use like blending brushes.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been recently trying to blend a little bit less and just use my brush strokes. But yeah, it's definitely a completely different process.
Yeah, so let me use this one as an example. This is the number 5 brushy. So brushy is designed to exaggerate the effect that is typical with my brushes, which is that you can see the up and down. We can see the brushy edges in there, and then left to right, we see the brushy edges left to right, right? And the reason this is good is that let's say we're making a circle. If we make concentric strokes like this, we can actually kind of make a fairly hard-edged circle. But if we scrape at it like this, it becomes soft and fuzzy.
Oh.
So the amount of blending we get has everything to do with the direction of the strokes. And this is true also of even the basic one, the old Huckleberry, where you can see that if we go up and down here, we can carve a fairly hard edge. So if we wanted to harden this edge up, we run the strokes up and down like this, and you can see we get a nice firm edge. And then if we wanted to blend this and soften it, we need to scrub back and forth to be able to use the soft edge here. So I see like you've got this little bit of rendering here on the arm, and I see the strokes running like this, which...
Yeah, I thought it was more about the opacity of each stroke than...
No. It's about the key to it is actually the direction. So if you wanted to blend this, even with it, typically I turn the opacity down a little bit if I want to start blending. But it's all about, like, you can see that the strokes are being, I'm going to exaggerate here, the strokes are being made like this. And when the strokes are made like this, then you end up with these soft edges that blend into each other at the beginnings and ends of those strokes. So you can really quickly blend stuff by just making sure that you're either starting or ending a stroke in there. Which might sound a bit technical, but let me show you the way in which it's not technical. Like, you want to add a highlight to something? Great. You figure out how much of the color you want. And then you can just grab it and you smush it out. And you can see how when you grab a color and smush it, you end up with this thing where it's just kind of like you took a big blob of paint and you smushed it with your finger. And then as you lower the opacity and you keep smushing, you can see how we go from pure tone, and then we can create these nice, smooth, even gradients coming off of it. And we don't have to like strategize or plan or do a lot. We just add a bit of color to where it's richest, and then we can just kind of smush it out from there. And we use the direction of our brush to be able to smooth it out. I'm actually working on a video to explain this. So this is a little preview of the video that I was going to make, because I realized, hey, I was showing off with the brushes I was making, but not kind of like what the philosophy is or how I use them, because it does run counter to the way that a lot of people use digital brushes. So, with that in mind, you can see like the point of this is all about edges. If you wanted to take this one level of polish further, what you could do is pick one of the cleaner brushes, find areas where you want to tighten an edge, and you run strokes back and forth like this across it. And then find places where you wanted to smooth out your rendering, and with the exact same brush, you scrub at it, and you can smooth it out. And that way you can sort of move across the whole image and pick areas that you want to tighten up, areas that you want to loosen, and you don't need to like switch between brushes or blending modes or any kind of nonsense. You just kind of enter a flow state and you just chill and sort of find areas that you want to carve up a little tighter. You can make a little rim to something and then decide that you want to smush it out. You can make things like just lose edges entirely and decide that you want to make like this kind of painterly lost and found edge look to areas. And it is a lot of freedom without messing with a lot of settings.
Yeah, that's kind of how I tend to work anyway. So I love that.
Yeah, I think that's like the most fun way to paint, because I don't want to be like going into my brush panel and like messing with like sliders and stuff between brush strokes. I can't imagine working like that. I want to maintain like focus on the canvas. And so I'm using keyboard hotkeys to switch opacity when I want to do something that's a little bit more blended versus like, say I want to carve a tighter edge. I'm going to adjust my brush a little bit on the size and opacity to be able to carve something a little tighter. But, I'm not switching between these brushes very much when I'm just trying to move through it and do my like adjustments and my blending.
Yeah. Cool.
Great. Any questions about it? Anything else that's on your mind related to painting?
I don't think so. I'm looking forward to messing with those a little bit more and trying that technique.
Yeah, give it a try. Most of these are
how it
all
goes.
some variation on the same thing. I think spongy is probably the one. If I'm trying to keep things rough, it's like my go-to. And then if I'm trying to get things smooth, just old Huckleberry, just the round brush with these parameters. And then a lot of these other ones are sort of for building, different types of marks or textures once you start getting a little bit more picky about it. Like I think the triangle one is good for irregular thin marks like hair and stuff. But I mean, it does the exact same thing. You can see thin into thick. We can carve a sharp edge, but then we can also make a scrubby one that's like much looser. And this can build up like blending and stuff, but they all have a little bit of a different characteristic to them. They're all basically the same exact philosophy as far as blending is concerned. So that's the whole point of the brush pack. And I'm planning on making more along the same lines, just because this is the only way I probably will ever paint. And I think that building more tools within this philosophy is probably just going to be my thing. So, if you've got any feedback while using the brushes, reach out, let me know. I'd love to figure out ways of improving it for the next version.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
Great. Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on stage.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. I'll see you around. And then last up, we have Larrivee. Larravee's here.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
How's it going?
It's so good. How about you?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to it. You're the last person to bring on stage in 2024, and then I'm moving on.
All right.
So, tell me a little bit about your experience this week.
I had a ton of fun. I loved the prompt and the picture and all the talk about Frazetta. So I kind of went all in for it, and I want to work on it a little bit more, probably during the holiday.
Okay.
But it went really smooth. The only thing that feels like I don't know how to patch it up is, I guess with digital, it always feels a little bit glossy or like thin. You know how when you paint in oil and it has like body to it and it's kind of matte in color. I feel like I struggle getting that almost like texture or like sensation with digital, and I'm trying to push it with this one.
Okay. Yeah, that can be tough. Like, there's a lot about the ways in which digital color mixes that is very different from traditional media. So when you put layers of color one over the other, or you look at the places where they meet when you're doing alla prima, you just don't get that effect in digital ever. I think there's some ways of simulating it in some of these programs like Painter or Rebel. I think do some of that, but in Photoshop, CSP, Procreate, Krita, the color is just different. It's a different, like it does different math. It's just calculated differently. And so I find that to be able to find the ideal versions of color, it requires a certain amount of like calibrating the way that you think about it. And for me, this is why I work with a mixture of blending modes as in addition to just good old fashioned like traditional mark making, because I don't think it's possible to get the right feeling out of color just by doing normal layers of like doing like a normal layer with just the normal brush with no blending without anything on it, because the way they blend into each other is always going to be a little dull and a little weird. And then the solution to that is to do blending modes, which you're right, can come off a little glossy or artificial looking. And so there's got to be some balance between the two, and finding a way that like you feel makes sense to you is a little bit of a personal journey. The blending modes that I use, I've compared notes with a lot of professionals. A lot of them just use different ones than me. And, different people like, Ross Draws built his whole career off of color dodge. I've never touched color dodge. I asked Bobby Chu what he uses hard light for. He says he's never heard anyone ever use hard light for anything. And I'm like, okay, great. So like, this is why I say it really is a personal journey. I mean, you can ask experts all over the world. They won't agree on this at all. But I did want to talk about blending modes with you a little bit, because I felt like the glow that you have here looks a little funky, and I had some solutions for you.
Okay, cool.
What did you use to make this glow here on the orb?
So that one, minus the stripes, which I did by like taking a brush stroke and putting a gradient on it.
Mm-hmm.
I tried out a lens flare.
Oh, okay. The filter?
And then, and then I lowered the opacity on it because it was really, really bold.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt a little iffy.
It's a bit iffy, yeah.
But it's fun.
All right, so the lens flare is kind of just painting on a picture of a lens flare, more or less. So that would be just like normal layer, like finding a color and then just like using a soft brush and just painting it in like this. And it's going to look a little dull, I think. Because like what we want is we want to see areas with lower and higher intensity are going to have different saturations to them. And so we need to use some kind of blending mode to make it happen. There's a few options. My old standard hard light, which I use for a lot of color stuff, I first got introduced to it as a solution for making glow effects. Let's see, what color glow do we want to make this? You want to make it a pink glow?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So if we just add hard light right here, and we just take pink and we just using the soft brush and hit it, you can see we get this very glowy effect very quickly, because it's not going to dull down that center highlight. This is it on normal. You can see it's looking pretty gross. But here we get this like brilliant glowy effect, because as it goes from this blown out center where we have zero saturation, as it transitions into more midtones, we start getting a ton of the saturation from this color down over the pixels underneath it. And so you can take like a middle tone and start splashing it around an area like this, and you can start getting like this very nice glowy effect. And so this is one of the areas where the only areas where I used soft brush for a long time was on these kinds of special effects. And my preferred method of adding it was always with hard light. But now hard light has become this like favorite tool of mine for like a bunch of different stuff. So one of the ways I find to make the glow look pretty natural is you find whatever color is kind of nearby. And then you can just splash that in with the hard light a little bit, or with the soft brush on hard light. And then I wouldn't try to cover it too evenly all over. Like I wouldn't try to make like a big solid mark that's going to have an even border like this. I think that because glowing is like this excess of light, this extra spillover of light, you don't get it kind of evenly all over because you're seeing this, the glow should be kind of coming off of everything unevenly. So I would pick areas where you think like the glow is kind of at its peak and add a little bit there, add a little bit here, and then you get this uneven pattern. And it's really, you're not going to notice it up close, but you'll notice it from far away. And you can, and you don't need to do it everywhere, but you do need to do it like where it's peaking, where the white is going beyond white. This is a sign of like the brightness beyond 100%, where it's overflowing and now it's spilling out to the area around it. There's always a little bit of overspill in light that makes things look a little bit more natural, but this is the really extreme version of it. And so we want to get a lot of color and a lot of saturation in that, because as it spills off of that highlight, it's going to like, you're going to start to see a little color of the photons in there. And so you can tint that however you like, especially if it's on its own layer. You can make it and then start, going, well, do I want to try a blue version of it? Do I want a pink version of it? Do I want a green? You can turn it up, you can turn it down, and you can start, as with all good tools, if it's going to make good results, it can make bad results. Like if you can see it start to go radioactive and crazy, then you know that you're somewhere on the right track, that you just need to tune it to where you like it.
I have never thought about using the scaling bar for that. That looks awesome.
Yeah, this is the hue saturation. So with hue saturation, if you have a layer that's more or less one color, let me just make a super exaggerated version here. So we've just got a color swatch here. We can swap the hue. We can turn the saturation up and down. And, we can turn the lightness up and down. And when it's under a blending mode like this on hard light, you can see we actually see the ways in which the blending is different depending on these different settings. Like with hard light, the saturation makes it go from like off to on. It'll go from opaque to transparent. And then the lightness does that to a degree as well. But you can see as it sort of passes through the middle, we get these really intense color blends. And then the different hues are going to bring through a lot of different variation as well. So instead of nailing it in one, with an effects layer like a glow, it can often be useful to go ahead and, spray in where you think things are going to look more or less right, and then double check all your assumptions by just twisting some knobs and seeing what looks good to you. And whatever looks good, maybe do that and then dial it back 50%. Because it's really easy to overdo it with these kinds of effects. So like whatever seems like right in the moment that you get excited about, I usually try to like figure out what feels like the best and then dial it back. And then from there, you can paint into it, paint on top of it, but you've got those colors available to you to be able to select and use for the rest of the painting. So like if we got this little bit of glow here and we like where this color's at on a new layer, we can now grab this and we have these tones to be able to use in other spots to like, to add as like complementary bits of color to build throughout the piece.
Yeah. That makes tons of sense. And it'll help with that glow around the outside too. How the original picture has like the black is faded into almost because of the bounce off the hair.
Yeah, there's a glow off the hair here, and you can see it's kind of inconsistent. Like it gets way bigger on the brighter part where there's a ton of light, but then we see like a little bulb of it here, and then it maybe not so much through here, and then it kind of flares back out again a little bit. Like it's not like one big even mass. It kind of it has these like waves to it where it goes in and out a little bit. It's kind of hard to distinguish with really, really soft gradients like this up when you're up close. I think it's actually easier to see when it's further away. You can see these kind of blobs Soft brush reveals itself much more at a distance. Just one of the reasons people often try to use soft brush to smooth things out up close, but it makes such an obvious mark for itself at a distance that like I'm always wary of using it for anything unless it's something like specialized like this.
Gotcha.
All right. I laid a lot on you all at once. Anything I can clarify before I let you go?
No, that made a lot of sense.
Okay, great.
And I think it'll turn out way better than the lens flare effect.
Yeah, the filters, there's some really incredible stuff in there they've built up over the years, but for painting, I don't know. In my hipster program, in Paint Tool Sci, there's a filters tab, and it's got one filter, and it's Gaussian blur. It's like
Nice.
by default, this program only has a filters tab, but it's only got one filter in it, and that's kind of the way that I do things too, where I will use Gaussian blur for like, let's say I'm making do I not have my star splatter or whatever? Like, let's say I'm making some. Oh yeah, I lost my star splatter from my old brush set. Let me get this set up real quick. Let's say I'm trying to put some stars in the sky, like this.
Yeah.
But I want to have like some bigger stars that are glowing. I will, you can make some pinpoints, and then you make a copy of that and you blur it to be able to add a little bit of glow automatically to stuff. I think Gaussian blur is useful for a bunch of things in painting, and it's the only filter that I will reliably use throughout my painting process, and I have over the years. So aside from, there's a bunch of utility stuff in there that is crazy for image processing and like making textures for 3D models, and like there's all sorts of weird little tricks and knobs in here, but for digital painting, don't worry about going past Gaussian blur. Gaussian blur is kind of the GOAT.
Yeah, sounds good. I've seen a lot of anime artists use that to make their line art look two colors at the same time.
Yes. So there's that. Oh, the one other one I like on the flip side of things, I will, whenever I'm posting something online, I will have it at web resolution. Let's get this down to web size, because right now it's at nice, healthy painting resolution. Once this is at web res, I will hit it with a sharpen. I'll do an unsharp mask, and this is my settings: 100% amount, radius of half a pixel, threshold of 0. And what this will do is areas like, you can see the texture around the orb here. You lose it. It gets blurry once you start getting to web resolution. It brings back some of the sharpness of fine detail. And so things that you like cared a lot about the texture of, and the texture that you thought was adding something before, it gets lost quite a bit without like an additional sharpen. I think that when you size things down in a lot of programs, you lose a lot of like the intended texture of things. And so I usually hit it with a little bit of an unsharp mask before posting. I think it adds a little bit of 0.5% of sauce to the mixture.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Well, that's it for today. Thanks everyone for joining me. There's no assignment for next week because we're not going to meet again until 2025. I'll make an announcement about when we're going to be coming back and what we're going to be working on. Might be some minor reassessments in how the whole thing is put together, but I'll be back sooner than you know it. Have an enjoyable holiday. Thank you all for joining me. I'll see you around. Have a good one. Happy New Year. Goodbye.